RealWear has created an impressive panel of senior leaders representing some of the industrial metaverse building blocks: software, AI, cloud, and hardware. We'll spend about 45 minutes in discussion. At the end, I'll summarize with perhaps 3 or 4 key takeaways for everybody. We all ready? Let's get right to it. Question 1. What's your perspective on the industrial metaverse, Andrew?
Hi, I'm Andrew Krastowski, Chairman and CEO of RealWear, the leader in industrial wearable solutions for frontline workers. And Chris, I'm excited to be here today and to take this exciting question. The metaverse is largely today a balkanized series of digital environments that focus on consumer and shared virtual experiences. It's all very independent and not at all interconnected. The industrial metaverse is going to be a subset of these coming standards where real world work can be accomplished in conjunction with digital assistants from models, AI, avatars, collaborators, etc., but will likely be episodic in the sense that it will not be continuous, but on demand when needed for assistance. Think of the difference between our internet experience today and what it was in the beginning before browsers and powerful search. That's how big a difference it's going to be, and that's how little friction will have to be removed before we can have an effective industrial metaverse. And John, what are your thoughts?
Thank you, Andrew. I'm John Fan. I'm the founder and CEO of Kopin. Kopin is a developer and manufacturer and provider of components in displays, optics for wearables, all in defense, in enterprise, and now in consumers. Now back to the question. As in the case of any new technology, especially big technology, everyone wants to go to consumer right away. However, big changes requires many developments of components, complementary technology, as well as the consumer habit has to be changed. So usually it started with defense, because defense people have to save lives, and they will tolerate higher quality, higher performance, and even higher cost components. And then you could go to enterprise, and finally go to consumer. In the enterprise world, they have to justify return on investment, ROI. It's different from defense, when defense really try to justify for saving lives. So I think in the case of metaverse right now, I would say it is already gone through the defense. We actually provided quite a lot of components for defense metaverse. But now I think we're seeing the beginning of industrial metaverse. I think for consumer world, I still think it is a couple of years away. So I will talk about that later. Now we'll pass on to Brian, who's probably going to talk more about the consumer metaverse.
Thank you, John. Hi, everybody. My name is Brian Vogelsang, and I work with Qualcomm in its XR business. So in XR, we're building chips and software for augmented reality and virtual reality headsets. And my role on the team is I lead a product called Snapdragon Spaces, which is an augmented reality platform for developers to create computer experiences for head-worn AR. So it's an SDK and a platform for developers. When it comes to my perspective on the industrial metaverse, I believe it's really a convergence of a number of technologies and trends in digital transformation that we've seen over the last 5 years. One is connecting everything in the industrial enterprise through IoT and private 5G networks, creating digital twins and using machine learning for predictive maintenance, using augmented reality and virtual reality for consuming information spatially in 3D and simulating or enhancing our physical realities digitally. And then 3D mapping and localization technologies, which can spatially organize information and experiences. So I think I don't really look at the industrial metaverse as a new technology. I think it's more an evolution of technology and a convergence where all these things come together and work together to create better outcomes for the industrial enterprise. So over to Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, and it's a great pleasure to be here and sharing and discussing about the metaverse, industrial metaverse specifically. My name is Indranil Sarkar. I'm part of Microsoft's worldwide manufacturing industry team. From the perspective of industrial metaverse, obviously there are so many different definitions. And like Brian was talking about, these are not new technology. These are all the foundational capabilities that are being built. On the core aspects of metaverse, what it is trying to do is to bring the physical and the digital together. And I think it allows not only allowing for people to collaborate or interact complex systems and in person or remotely. Essentially the way how with the changes in the businesses that is happening today in the post-pandemic era, where you have labor shortages and everything else, and it's becoming so much more critical on how people are being trained faster, are they are able to interact faster, learn on the job and other things. So there are those elements of it that are playing important business outcomes that will drive through this kind of a environment. But again, the foundation starts all the way of integrating an enterprise, specifically a manufacturing environment, and then being able to take that data and be able to interact virtually, as an example. Over to you, Chris.
Yeah, Indranil, thank you very much. Boy, each of you really teased us with the high level of what you see the industrial metaverse to be. Let's go a little deeper if we can. I'd love to hear how you really define this idea, maybe a little deeper and maybe in different verticals. What are the big benefits that we might be able to see going forward? And, what's it going to look and feel like, Indranil?
Yeah, and I think taking that thought from the previous conversation we just talked about, when we think about the physical world, we now start to talk about the connecting that physical world. And so, the core aspect of that connectivity is ability to synchronize that environment between the virtual and the physical as the first level, and then being able to model and monitor that environment. That's the key aspect, another aspect of it, that you're able to visualize, model from a modeling perspective. Bringing in, infusing, the data, contextualized data in those models becomes the next level of maturity that we see in this, digital twin as an example of it, how it's evolving over there. What it does is it allows to not only track what's going on, analyzing and predicting and using simulation models, etc., but it also allows for people to actually track the past, rewind and replay, as an example, to understand what that environment might look like. But ultimately, it is also about the people and the people processes. How can one be able to interact with that in a virtual way? Having the right level of haptics and other things, being able to feel those things are becoming kind of a critical element of it. And I think, those are the various elements of the capabilities that are happening as we speak. Essentially what it is doing is it is transforming into more of a software-defined industrial environment, as an example. It improved, complex operations as an example of it. And in terms of the various areas of the vertical capabilities we can think about, from engineering design to, how you actually deploy, build factories faster, or even reconfigures from a work cell in terms of, say, for example, doing simulations and being able to bring it there. Looking to the production operations as the second, so every industry verticals will have those different requirements as an example. Training and safety will play also a lot about, many of those scenarios. So we do see those are the core foundational capabilities, but the variations will happen depending on which industry vertical one is really working on and where these would be discrete set of capabilities. But in general, the broader context of the metaverse is to elevate that experience from a factory level using that software-defined capability as a next level. So I'll pass that on to Andrew.
Well, Indranil, just amazing answer here. So I couldn't agree more with what you just said. I just expand maybe a little bit on the topic, which is the benefit side of this is really demographics are destiny. And the part of the real mission, I think, of the industrial metaverse is going to solve the skilled labor gap issue that we have. That's going to be a persistent problem for for industry for decades. And when you think about the industrial metaverse, I think of a more human-centric approach to solving the problem than just the pure automation that we think about. Automation is going to be there, but we think that the metaverse, the industrial metaverse, provides a mechanisms for the humans to be really part of that nexus of control that we heard Indranil talk about, the way that the data in context and making decisions about it. I think in terms of how it's like to experience it, I think it's going to be very fast, it's going to be nearly friction-free, and it's going to be fabulous. And I think that workers under these circumstances will simply work more productively. They're going to work more safely, and the work itself, I think, becomes by nature more collaborative and rewarding. And I think the idea and the risks of this lone worker become anachronistic. It's like piecework and steam power. It's going to make global enterprises easier to manage. And you heard Indranil talk about that in this convergence of the digital and the actual world. So a great example I just thought of as we were sitting here was just 2 weekends ago, I was in Miami at the F1 event. And what I saw there was the teams who were using 3D modeling of airflows over their race car to optimize a design. And then they took that and put it in a wind tunnel and got additional data to see how it worked in interaction with real airflows. And then they took that same model out onto the track with a sensorized vehicle and run it in actual atmospheric conditions and track conditions, constantly with the objective of optimizing the vehicle's performance for that particular situation. I think that's somewhat analogous to what we're going to see in this industrial metaverse, this interaction between the physical world with actual feedback into models and 3D elements of this digital world that can take all the compute power and interaction and provide real improvements and real adjustments that can be made in the actual world with instantaneous feedback, as Indranil said, to the digital model. So I think it's really about this optimization of performance is a big part of it. John, what do you think?
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I agree with many things you say. I think it's obvious to say that in the industrial metaverse, there'll be a lot of significant productivity gains. As you mentioned today, Andrew, I mean, they'll reduce time to perform certain tasks, high accuracy and reliability, and actually reduce cost. But I think it's important actually to listen to the customers. I actually think productivity gains will come in many forms. And the important thing is actually listen to the customers, and they will find out some of the benefits with something that we'll not even imagine today. So ultimately, I think it is listen to the customers and practice with them. So with that, I'll actually pass on to Brian.
Thanks, John. So in terms of defining this idea of the industrial metaverse and the benefits around it, if we think about what it looks like, well, it's about connecting machinery, equipment, sensors and actuators, autonomous guided vehicles, and the people who are working in these industrial enterprises, and then taking that data and syndicating it in real time, to the cloud or to the network edge, where it can be processed and can be visualized in real time by those workers. And it's about building 3D models or digital twins representing the equipment and the robotics in the factory or the warehouse, and then building a map of that factory or warehouse either in CAD or through technologies like LiDAR scans, where essentially you can localize the physical location of the digital twin and overlay the data on top of it. So this is where things like AR glasses come into play, because if once you have that physical map overlaid on top of the digital data, now you can use AR glasses to visualize that data that's being syndicated from the machines, as well as the information, and then also understand the location using things like visual positioning, where the workers are on that digital map, and this improves things like safety and operational efficiency, and ultimately you have happier workers. So I think the benefits are really about supercharging operations, about better outcomes, about more efficient operations and better planning, and lower costs. So back to Chris.
Yeah, thanks very much, On that, Brian, I think you touched on a lot of good things kind of ahead of time because we have another question that's going to go hopefully a little even deeper than we just did. But I think we're all hitting this topic from different perspectives, and we're learning from each of you. So this is great. Our question 3 is: now that we've kind of semi-defined the metaverse, how will factory workers interact with the metaverse, given that they need to use, use their hands for the job, and that there are certainly hazardous environments, all over the world for these things. So how do we do this? Let's get a little more detailed. I'll start with you, Andrew, this time.
Thanks, Chris. I think assisted reality solutions are today's gateway to tomorrow's industrial metaverse. Safety has got to be the first priority whenever you're dealing with people in a frontline environment. As I've said before, you can't be obliviously to reality with your head stuck in the metaverse when there are real and potentially lethal risks that are around you in the factory. It's going to have to be a reality first, digital second experience, so that the reality takes the key here. All the senses, of course, can be potentially involved in this feedback to the workers. So it cannot just be what you see. It can be what you're hearing from the industrial metaverse. It could even be potentially in wearables what you're feeling and perceiving by touch. All of this can be transmitted to the frontline worker and sent back into the metaverse for analysis. So I think that's going to be the key, that we understand whatever data is being interacted. And you heard Brian talk about the models that will come back, the as built, as designed in there. That feedback can be such that you know where the worker is in relative to that real space and that virtual space. You can see what they're doing and the impact of the connected devices they're working with, whether they be IoT devices in the machines or things that they're wearing personally. And all that control can come back into the cloud for optimization, management, et cetera. So I think all of those things come to the fore, but nothing comes before the safety of the worker and this idea of their experience always being reality first, digital second, and on demand, where they're not completely immersed in that environment all the time. So, Brian, what do you think?
No, I agree with you, Andrew, in terms of assisted reality sort of being the on-ramp to visualizing this data at the moment. So, being able to, oftentimes, workers in these environments they don't have access to data, and the idea of putting a wearable on them that can syndicate this information to them in real time, or track their location, or do other things that can improve their safety or efficiency is really, really important. So I think that just having the metaverse in place without the human element is not going to work. So factory workers need these wearable devices. They need to be have the data at their fingertips to help improve their outcomes, and they need to be hands-free. So today, assisted reality devices like the devices from RealWear are huge in making that happen. And in hazardous environments, especially, this is for safety purposes and regulatory purposes and other things. It's extremely important to be able to connect the workers and have them be able to have access to this information at their fingertips. So I think I'm really excited about where we are today and how enterprises are beginning to experiment with this technology, connect their systems, connect their workers to data. And I think really this is just the beginning. We, despite this technology having been in place for a few years, it's now really coming together in a way that is going to transform, how workers work and what it means to be an industrial enterprise. So I'm just very excited about what the future holds. John, your thoughts?
Thank you, Brian. I cannot agree more with Andrew and Brian. As I always mentioned, in this metaverse case, especially in industrial case, human must come first before technology. I do believe hands-free voice control, actually two-way visual support systems will have many applications in the factories. One thing we learned through many years working with Defense Department is that small things can make a big difference. In fact, what I mean by small things, for instance, if you have to wear for a long period of time, you have to make sure the users are comfortable to use the product. A lot of times people ignore that, and then the workers will never put it on. Even the soldiers will not put it on. So this is another thing. Another thing I would also mention, which I think I've been preaching for a while, I think the see-through optics actually, as the augmented reality experience, is really not that carefully suited for factory workers. I actually think see-through optics, optical see-through, is actually not safe for factory workers. So some kind of video see-through is much safer, or a second screen, which the RealWear is doing. The second screen is how people do. When you're driving, a second screen is next to you. You don't have see-through right in front of you when you're driving. And that consumer has tried it many, many times. In the defense, the same way. The see-through optic doesn't work. Only in a pilot case where they have to land on a carrier. Other than that, it's always a second screen or video see-through. And I cannot even stress strong enough that in a factory workers environment, what RealWear is doing is the safest way for factory workers. So with this, I'll pass on to Internels.
Thank you. No, this is quite critical, because end of the day, if we are, from an operational perspective, industries, manufacturing has always been using data analytics to analyze and run their operations, and people will always adapt to it. I think what Metaverse is doing is essentially bringing a visualized version of how you can bring all this contextualized data together. And I think that's an important part of distinction to think about what it is today and where it is moving towards. And we are already seeing elements of these are already getting implemented with lots of different customers. And I think some of the more advanced customers are already not only piloting, but they're moving more into that production environment in some way. And to John's earlier point, I think the use cases will vary depending on the scenario one is working with. Training, safety, and other things are probably the easiest way how people can get trained in an environment, without being endangering themselves, or in a production environment that needs to be as one of those clear examples of it. But I think getting those tools are quite critical, and the ability to interact is only one part of it. But I think what we now start to see is that next level where you can actually have multiple parties working together in solving a problem. I think those are the next generation capabilities that we are already starting to see evolving, whether it is in the design areas, or whether somebody who's working on a lean project, Kaizen methods and other things that they want to do, utilizing collaboration and communications capabilities, how they can actually look into the real data and then being able to utilize some of those things. So those are the key tools that becomes an enabler. So one technology doesn't solve all the problem. You have to think about what those the complementary capabilities that also need to be brought together to be able to do it. And on top of that, what we start to see is the application of AI. How you actually now start to take data and make it a lot more meaningful, by learning on its own. The knowledge management aspect of it, how people are problem solving, solving problems, complex problems, let's say in terms of maintenance scenarios, and then being able to project those much more quicker to the end users and being able to solve that. And we see a combination of these things will make the metaverse a lot more powerful. As an example, end of the day, these are tools, these are capabilities, but bringing together elements of the different levels and then making them work. And so again, that's been only the starting point of the conversations. I think we will see a lot more evolution over the next many years to come, and as we are exploring this new frontier altogether. Chris, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Indranil. To your point, we have some really great collaboration tools now that we can use, and then I'm sure we'll be using more with the coming of Web3 and the metaverse. And also, I'm looking ahead to how observability tools will be used in the future to help measure these things. Those are points that are just kind of in their infancy. Those type of apps, I think we're going to see a lot more along those lines. Our final question touches again on a little bit of what we've already spoken about, But what pieces are available today of the metaverse, and what needs to be built? Now, that's a big question. There's a lot that needs to be built. How do we know also when we finally arrived and the metaverse is secondhand? We don't think about it, kind of like the web is now or the cloud. What's the ultimate objective, John?
Thank you. It's a quick question. I've been thinking about this. In the metaverse, as you well know, we always believe will come in stages. It started with defense and go to enterprise and go to consumer. How it would be adopted would come in stages, but the core components are quite similar. You do need audio, and in this case, the audio part is pretty much available now. There are a lot of activities in audio for the last 20 years. In fact, the audio metaverse is basically ready. The next part is the sight audio metaverse, and it requires a very good display system. And I think they're coming. I think it certainly is available for enterprise. For the consumer world, I think the performance will be better, costs will go better, lower, and the supply chain becomes a very big issue. When you go to consumer, you need a lot of displays. And these are special displays which are different from the cell phone displays. And I think we're working very, very closely now on how to solve the supply chain issues. Then you have the optics. The optics needs are different too. Is that they have to magnify certain things or display into a huge image. But that part is almost ready. I would say within a year or two, and the supply chain problem is not as acute. Then, of course, you have all the software and other stuff, which I think many companies are doing very well with it. So my own comment is the hardware is actually the challenge right now. Supply chain, displays, perhaps a little bit of the optics, and the whole system, how to make it light, how do you put it on the head that you can actually wearable, is it convenient to use? So it is coming though. It is already come in the defense world, and for the RealWear case, it's already coming to the enterprise world. And the consumer is a few years away, but many of the core components are coming together. So with this, I'll pass on to Andrew.
Thanks, John. Thank you very much. And I'd just like to build on the points that Indranil and John just made, because what really struck me as I listened to them was the human-centric nature of the industrial metaverse. When we think about industry, we think about the automation, we think about the move to mechanize and eliminate labor. But the industrial metaverse is almost by definition a human-centric technology that takes all of that and puts that nexus control back to the person. So you heard about the importance of the right tool for the right purpose, whether it's training or safety training and doing things offline. All of that becomes possible in this industrial metaverse, as well as then taking those lessons into the real world. So I think this idea of human creativity, collaboration, all augmented by the technology is what we should walk away with when we think about why we should be excited about this industrial metaverse. The singularity, I think that the point where work will no longer be the same ever again is when we have this safe and secure digital handshake between these 3D digital models that exist today and the real work that's being done on the front line. And so that those tie together of that where a connected worker is now able to get that information from the industrial metaverse, take action on it, and those actions are reflected immediately in the system. So that real assets based on data, workflow, avatar collaboration, and all of those changes and their consequences reflecting back in the system, I think are going to be key to that experience. I think also we'll have this idea that when you're not a connected worker in the future, you're going to be a disadvantaged worker. You're not going to have the same ability to be productive as someone who is part of this connected universe. Just as we would say most knowledge workers are infinitely more productive based on their connection to the internet and their ability to work from anywhere, et cetera. So what's in place, Chris? I think clearly, as John just said, many of these elements are in place. IoT, audio sensors, the software to handle that, nearly ubiquitous connectivity, but we need to do more. There's a lot more that's going to come from 5G and other solutions that make sure in these disadvantaged environments that often surround industrial settings that we have good connectivity. So that's, I think, still a ways to come. But in general, I think I'd agree with what John has said. It's the pieces are primarily there, but we haven't de-balkanized. We haven't created standards that allow all of this digital experience to flow seamlessly through a number of applications and situations. So I think that's the big gap that we're going to see as we claw through the next few years. And I think that's a problem that Qualcomm's taking seriously. So Brian, maybe you can add on that.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. In terms of what needs to be built and how will we know when it's arrived, one of the things that we think is really important is we need to be able to 3D map our spaces so we can align sort of the physical with the digital and track the location of the worker relative to the physical machines. We need good connectivity for that. So this is something Qualcomm spends a tremendous amount of time and energy developing. 5G networks, next generation Wi-Fi networks, private networks. So these are networks that are controlled and operated by the enterprise. Connecting things like glasses so that we can see the spatially aligned or organized data coming off of the machines and be able to, as a connected worker, interact with the data and the machines. So I think we'll know we've arrived in the industrial metaverse when every worker is using wearable, augmented, or assisted reality devices to enhance their productivity. Collaboration, I think, is a huge opportunity here. Andrew mentioned this. It's in order to be able to provide remote assistance to these workers, to be able to connect them with a mentor, and that mentor might be a physical, it might be a person in another location, or it might be an avatar and an AI-driven mentor that's helping them solve a problem in their job. So I agree also with in terms of what needs to get built. John mentioned the display and sort of optics technology as a challenge. We do need to make these in order to get them on every worker's head, we need to make them smaller and we need to make them more power efficient. We need to deliver the right visual experience so that people feel like these things enhance their work. And so this is one of the challenges that we need to overcome. But there's a tremendous amount of progress being made on this over the last 2 years, and we kind of can see ahead over the horizon at Qualcomm and are really excited about what we see in the future. Indranil?
Yeah, no, I think Brand, you laid out really some of the key areas, components, spatial computing as one of the key elements of it. And the interesting part of it is that, all of these core capabilities it's a collection of capabilities. When you think about, how you actually stack them up, I think the bigger conversation is around, how do you actually integrate, manage, maintain, enhance, and extend those capabilities even furthermore. That's the other part of the discussion here. But I think, when we think about those core, those capabilities, and, Microsoft has been already working in this industrial space for a very long time, essentially, looking at it all the way from the IoT to the industrial IoT, from an intelligent edge perspective and connecting it to the intelligent cloud as an example of it. That's basically, bringing together the factory environment or a plant environment, integrating that part of it. Things like digital twin, is one of those other elements of it. How you actually can now contextualize that data that is getting generated in the factory environment, from not just about the time series, but understanding what those time series data actually mean on the longer run, on how you actually understand that part of it. And then being able to model and visualize that, infusing that IoT data within it, and then being able to understand with it. And then there are other associated capabilities, like, intelligent edge, 5G, and other things that Brian just talked about are core areas of how you make them available. But then as you go above on the stack, you start to realize that capabilities like AI and simulations and analytics, they all start to play an important role in the context of how you build an enterprise or an industrial vision of that foundation, of the software-defined foundation that I talked about earlier. And then, and ability then starting to create is how now you enable the workforce or the frontline workers in this particular space. What are the core capabilities? Things like, mapping capability. How do you actually guide them to get to one location to another location for, say, for example, predictive maintenance of an equipment as an example? How do you overlay that data of that particular equipment as they are working with it, and how you actually solve that, and or maybe collaborate with the actual equipment manufacturer, in a hands-free way of trying to solve some of those problems. So technology-wise, some of those things are already being talked about. Throughout the last year in multiple events, we talked about these metaverse capabilities coming in as an example of it, and things like Azure Mesh, where we are now talking about being able to collaborate. But I think I like the idea of how Andrew talks about from a RealWear perspective, and that's really a way of how you start to think about solving some of the basic challenges that exist there, giving the right tool to them, and then being able to collaborate. And we see these examples coming up over and over again, whether it is in an assembly process. How do you actually connect one cable to another cable and actually making them happen? And so we see these are coming together. And in our view, from Microsoft perspective, our view is that we can't solve the problem all by ourselves. It has to be an ecosystem of partnerships, and that actually can bring these core technologies, because end of the day, it is about that customer. It is about the worker that actually can need to really take advantage of many of those capabilities as an example of it. Chris, over to you.
Well, thanks, Indra. No, man, there are any number of good data points that you could take away from this discussion. But I jotted down a few as taking notes during the discussion here, as a journalist would tend to do. But one that stuck out for me was assisted reality will be a combination of reality and augmented reality. But reality is always going to be first. Safety is always going to be first at all times in industrial metaverse jobs, for sure. Another one would be, we'll be synchronizing data and modeling and supercharging operations to get more things done quicker and more efficiently in the industrial metaverse. One that was brought up quickly by John is the audio metaverse is basically here now. I can see that. The video still needs some work, but well, I'm sure that people are working on it right now. Finally, a takeaway that I got personally, a non-connected worker will be a disadvantaged worker in the industrial metaverse. So that's important. So that's a wrap for today. Thank you to our expert panelists and for RealWear for inviting me to facilitate. I really enjoyed this panel in the format, and I hope you did too. Please let me know if you have any comments below. Be sure to follow everybody on the panel here on LinkedIn and Twitter. I'm Chris Primesberger of VentureBeat and ZDNet. See you all in the future in the industrial metaverse.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.